So it's a great honor to have you here today on this election day. Today's Tuesday Times Roundtable is going to be on a topic um, of understanding homelessness causes, challenges, and solutions. My name is Janeri Mendoza Farjun, and I am the Senior Program Coordinator here at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. And we also have with us Michelle Saldivar, our Program Manager, Natalia Bocci, Graduate Assistant, and Jitanjali Jatu, our other graduate assistant. Our team is going to be managing the chat and also the Q&A section. So if you come across any questions that you have throughout the presentation, feel free to utilize those two resources. We're going to go ahead and answer them throughout the presentation. TTR, it is the Office of Global Learning Initiatives flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on current global issues and trends while fostering meaningful conversations that are aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And all the TTR sessions, they are recorded. So you might go to our YouTube channel and reference them back to the sessions that we had for the semester. If you haven't had a chance yet, please scan the QR code that you see in the screen. This is going to be the way how we're going to report today's attendance. And the form is going to close at 1 p.m. So make sure that you click on the link in the chat or you scan the QR code as soon as possible so we can keep a record of your attendance for today. Right. And if you would like to learn more about the global learning programs and the initiatives that we have available for all students, this includes Peace Corps Prep, Global Learning Medallion, the scholarships and fellowships, feel free to visit our website at goglobal.fiu.edu/students. So that way you can connect with one of us and learn more about it. We also have peer advising hours, so if you would like to connect with another global learning student, you may come on Wednesdays from 10 to 12 o'clock to our office, or also join them via Zoom at go.fiu.edu/PA hours. For our Global Learning Medallion students, just a reminder that these TTR sessions, they count as a 1-point activity. So just make sure that you do a screenshot of your signing so you can submit it for your activities log. So in addition, TTR is always links to a New York Times article, so you can continue the discussion. And today's article is at go.fiu.edu/TTR1105. You may also activate your account by going to accessnyt.com, where you can have digital free access to the New York Times. So our topic for today, it is connected to Sustainable Development Goal number 10, reduce inequalities. And then this is to reduce inequalities within our country and also among nations. And you would like to learn more about the targets, the indicators, and the progress on this goal, you may visit the go.fiu.edu/SDG. All right, so now it is my great honor to introduce today's presenters. Alexandra Gonzalez, she is an AmeriCorps alumni and also an ISSS coordinator at the Office of ISSS here at FIU. Alexandra has been working with international students since high school, traveling to Western Europe and throughout North America. She loves connecting with the students from diverse backgrounds and supporting them in their educational journeys. Alexandra holds a bachelor's degree from the Evergreen State College in Washington State and relocated to Miami in 2015, where she now works at the Office of International Student and Scholar Services here at FIU, managing student records within the university and the CIVIS database. Additionally, she advises international students on a range of topics, including immigration, social and cultural adaptation. She's also a proud AmeriCorps alumni. Alexandra served with the Reading Corps in 2008, promoting literacy and reading comprehension, and with the Washington State Service Corps in 2012, where she supported over 800 AmeriCorps members statewide. Her unique experience and dedication made her an invaluable resource and advocate for students around the world. Welcome, Alexandra, to today's session.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. This is very wonderful to see so many people excited to talk about this subject. So we are discussing today homelessness, specifically examining the major causes of homelessness in the United States, and then the challenges and responses that at the federal level and beyond in addressing the issue. And then we're going to end with some ways that you can get involved at the ground level for addressing and getting involved with homelessness. So we're going to open up the chat and the microphones, and we're going to leave the floor open to discuss the differences. I know some of you are from other countries, some of you may be from out of state, and just kind of name and notice any differences between the homeless population that you've seen in Miami and where you're from or other places that you've traveled to. You can also use the raised hand notice if you want to. Yeah, you can answer the poll in the chat.
Should I talk?
Yes, please.
I'm from Argentina. I got here in August,
Mhm.
and in Argentina, we're really struggling economically right now. So since I've got here, I've only been here for 3 months, and I haven't really left the area. So I don't know how it really is, but I
Mhm.
haven't seen a lot of homeless people. And compared to where I'm from, where you wouldn't walk 100 meters without passing 3 people begging for money, which is really sad, but it's crazy.
Mhm. That's an important distinction. Thank you for bringing that up. I see someone in the chat from Venezuela. Yeah, it is really rough over there as well. Someone's saying there's not as many resources available in their home country than in Miami. And then this is really interesting. Someone who lives in Miami Lakes noticing more homeless people as well as in Hialeah Gardens and a lot more homeless people close to the beach. Geography does play a very important role. We will touch on that a little bit later. I see Jerva Levi. I'm sorry about that pronunciation.
Yeah, that's me. Oh, sorry if my audio is bad.
Oh, you're good.
Well, for me, I came from Boston. That was my last university. I transferred, and there were a lot of homeless people there. There was actually an entire space called Melnia Cass. Oh, it was called Melnia Cass Boulevard, and basically there was this entire street that had a bunch of homeless encampments, and it was a problem for the city. But at the same time, I feel like there's more resources for homeless people in Boston because there were a lot of things like DTA to help homeless families and children. And here, I feel like there's not that much of that, but that's just a personal thing that I've noticed.
Yeah, that's a good thing to pick up on. All right, I see. So sorry. Yokebed, I see your hand.
Yes, that's me. Sorry. That you pronounced it correctly. So something that I noticed, I'm originally from Nicaragua, and when you see homeless people, sometimes you see them with children, like their own like daughters and sons. And that's something that you don't see here in Miami. It's usually adults.
That's true. We will cover that also a little bit later. Okay, Amelia Hayslip.
Hi, yes. I am from, well, my mother is from Finland, so I've spent quite a bit of time there,
Mhm.
and we have a very, very small homeless population, so it's really interesting to compare the population in Miami and in a city like Helsinki, which
Mhm.
there's obviously quite a bit more homeless people here.
That's very true. All right. I do see a couple more things in the chat that we'll bring up, and then we will move forward. So I do see a comment from Marion. I travel a lot, and I've noticed the homelessness in Miami is way greater than that in European countries. Over there, you rarely see a homeless person, and they're on every block. And then Paul from Venezuela says, having been there, have not been there in a while, but something I can point out is the ubiquity of mental health issues with the homeless population in the area from Venezuela that I come from. Here in Miami, I've seen seemingly healthy, able-bodied adults begging.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I traveled a lot in America too, and I feel like compared to other big American cities, in Miami, I see less homeless people. Is it because they're not allowed to be camping in the city like in California, or is it because there are actually less homeless people?
So it's not that there are less homeless people, but it is true that in states like California and Washington, there are things called like tent cities, which one of the students referred to earlier, where it's just massive amounts of homeless people camping essentially under tents and kind of grouped together. It's very difficult, as you may have seen in the news, to kind of galvanize public policy to assist homeless people in a very straightforward way. Some of you may be familiar with the recent referendum for taxing food on Miami Beach. One of the commissioners said that, if they had added that 1% tax for businesses making over $400,000 a year, that would directly benefit homeless shelters, agencies helping homeless people, it would make eating and dining in Miami Beach way too expensive. So I think they left it on the ballot because it was too late to remove for the voting for the public, but they're not going to take any action on the information that they receive. And that, not that exact scenario, but things like that do happen quite a bit in the United States and in many other places and scenarios. So we're going to switch back to this guy. Okay. So in the United States, we have a fixed definition for homelessness, which is anyone who does not have regular, sufficient place to sleep at night. We do have a federal agency, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they have 4 different types of homelessness listed. They have people who are literally homeless, which we oftentimes refer to as unhoused. So those are the people that you see sleeping on the sidewalk with like a shopping cart filled with all of their stuff. They have people who are at imminent risk of being homeless. So people who have lost their job and are behind on their rent, people who are getting kicked out of their house by parents or family members. They have homeless under other federal statutes. So that could be people who have had their homes destroyed by natural disasters, people who are staying in emergency shelters that are kind of designed to be short term. And then their 4th category is people fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. But some other categories that other agencies in the US seek to address that cover homelessness are things like episodically homeless, where people frequently experience homelessness, like they have trouble keeping a steady job, so they have trouble keeping a place to live. Families or individuals that local authorities are required to assist, things like that, kind of statutory homelessness. It's a little bit difficult to define on a global scale because there is no universal definition for homelessness. Different countries have different standards of what homeless means, culturally and economically. But the main point is it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you live. You have seen or interacted with a homeless person at some time in your life. It is a public problem that affects everyone. And the hazard of experiencing homelessness is not uniformly distributed across different populations. Who experiences homelessness, how they are described, and how they are treated at federal, local, and societal levels are all key components that can be instrumental in either ending or perpetuating homelessness. So it's a tool that could go both ways. And we have a quote from the 1991 Houston Law Review by Michael Perlin. He had a section called Competency Deinstitutionalization, which we will cover shortly, and homelessness. And he took Winston Churchill's aphorism of you can judge the state of a civilization by the way it treats its institutionalized to then include we can also judge the state of a civilization by the way it treats those without a home. So if you look at how homeless people are talked about at a local level, just between people or between businesses, at a federal level, how they're portrayed in the media, who is experiencing homelessness, that says a lot about the country and the culture in which you are living. So going through a few slides at looking at the major contributors to homelessness on just a national scale in the United States. Homelessness was happening before this time, obviously, but this is around the time that it started to become visible on a national scale. Similar to the tent cities of today, there were something called Hoovervilles, which were a very common term for kind of shack towns. They didn't really have like camping tents on such a large scale. So tent towns or shack towns and like homeless encampments. And it was a very politicized name, Hooverville. It was named after President Herbert Hoover, whom a lot of people blamed for the economic collapse. And then later, something called the Dust Bowl, which was a series of really bad dust storms in America and Canada that meant farms were not able to produce food. Farmers lost their homes, workers and families also lost their homes. So a huge part of the population, not just in the United States, also in Canada, had no work and nowhere to go. The longest lasting Hooverville was located in Seattle, Washington. It stood as an autonomous community from 1931 to 1941. So they had an unofficial leader. There were some aspects of organization within the Hooverville. There's a lot of documentation about it in the bibliography that we have attached to this presentation. The largest Hooverville was located in St. Louis, Missouri. That was home to estimated 8,000 homeless people from 1930 to 1936. And that's a really good example of just the scale nationwide, not just in Missouri, of how many people had no work, had no food, and then just ran out of options. And something that's important to note is that despite growing public sympathy for homelessness, because people would really band together, they would work on barter systems, women would work outside the home to kind of do what you could with what you had. Local governments really struggled with the idea of Hoovervilles because they were very visible signs of pervasive poverty. So next one is deinstitutionalization. So this is an excellent example of the idea of unsheltered homelessness being a prevailing identifier or category of homelessness, because not all homeless people look like the people that you see begging on the street. That's just one facet and one category. And not all people in that category are mentally ill. You know, some of them have a history of drug abuse. Some of them are struggling with other issues. Some of them have run out of options at shelters. It's also important because there's a really big idea in the United States, especially among some older generations, that, oh, it went away. There's an idea amongst older generations that people who are living unsheltered on the street are mentally ill just across the board. And a lot of the people who were affected by deinstitutionalization just immediately went out to live on the street. But not everyone who was affected by deinstitutionalization became unsheltered. At the very height of deinstitutionalization in New York, which was between, I think, 77 to 73, people who were discharged went to live with, family. Many of them went to adult homes. Most of them went to nursing homes because they were afflicted with things like dementia. Quite a few went to single room occupancy hotels, which are not designed for or meant to be long-term care facilities, right? So that would be one scenario where, sure, you had somewhere to go, but eventually you would not stay there for very long. In the city where I lived in Washington State, it's a very small town. There's about 10,000 people living there as of last year's census. One of the high school football stars in the late 70s, his name was Brad Oling. He, normal American football star, lots of girlfriends, very handsome. He overdosed on LSD at a party, and he had a very severe brain injury. And he had family members in the community who cared for him. They had space in their homes. They helped him with regular medicine, but he would not stay with them, partially because of his brain injury and partially just sometimes they were away or they weren't able to care for him at this consistent level that he needed. And he would just walk around the town for decades. I knew him. I would work in a cafe and we would feed him, give him food. Sometimes the owner of the cafe would give him new coats or shoes in the winter. It became kind of like a community effort to take care of him because people remembered him from before, and he just would not stay with his family in a consistent manner. Sometimes he was arrested. Sometimes he was sent away to a hospital, but they always brought him back because of the deinstitutionalization policies. And he was killed a few years ago when he stepped into oncoming traffic, which was a really big loss for the community because people knew him and people really liked him. And it's something that happens not just in small towns, but all over the place. The stigma around it is very hard to address and fight. Because of this policy, there is no mental health treatment system across the board that will take people in, which is very frustrating sometimes. There is a psychologist, Michael B. Friedman, who has written extensively on this subject, and he has identified two main ways to address homelessness among the mentally ill. He believes first that preventing homelessness among people with severe mental illness requires more housing designed for people with long-term serious mental illness. Secondly, that preventing homelessness also requires protection of income supports like Social Security and Social Security disability. And without doubt, requiring people with psychiatric disabilities to go through stringent eligibility reviews will result in many losing coverage. So there has been talk in the past of maybe not limiting, even though that would be the end result, but like regulating to a deeper extent who receives disability, who receives Social Security, and not everyone is able to go through those processes, which would result in a lot of people losing care. The next big kind of wave would be in the 1980s with the AIDS crisis and recovering from the recession in the 70s. So following the post-World War II economic boom that our country experienced, we had a recession in the 70s. And one of the results of that recession was that affordable housing, both inside and around cities in more rural areas, was scarce in the 80s. And the US Department of Housing and Urban Development could not do a whole lot about it. In 1976, their budget was $29 billion, and it was regularly reduced or slashed until it hit a low point of about $17 billion in 1990. So that gap in budget resulted in a huge loss of services, not just to individuals experiencing difficulty with getting a secure housing situation, but also with agencies and organizations who could otherwise apply for grants to help these people. On top of all of this, there was a lot of stigmatization of AIDS and how it was contracted by the Reagan administration. And there was a lot of social backlash against infected individuals. People did not really understand how it spread initially. And because it first appeared in urban centers and amongst the homosexual population, it was very easy to moralize the issue in the early days. People experienced homelessness regularly when they would contract HIV, and people around them, not understanding what it meant, how it happened, would reject them and throw them out of the house or out of their living situation. Reagan himself, former President Ronald Reagan, did not really start becoming vocal or taking a stand about it until his friend Rock Hudson came out as having contracted HIV on, I think it was a newscast. So, you know, talking about it is a really good way to combat these kind of things, but this is a really good example of how societal changes, societal pressures, and how the media projects and reflects the condition of homelessness and what causes it has huge effects on how it's processed, how it's handled. And then the big one, so COVID. So probably very likely because of the emphasis put on shelter in place. And a lot of the federal steps that were taken to provide relief measures, there was actually a decline in homelessness among the sheltered populations. So remember from earlier, that would be people who are insecure in their housing. Maybe they've lost their jobs, or they're just behind on the rent, or they've had a cut in their income. A lot of people lost their jobs in COVID because they were not able to work remotely. Those people did not transition into full-blown homelessness, or they were prevented from becoming homeless during COVID-19. And overall, the number of people accessing shelters did decline from 2019 to 2021. There were a lot of federal COVID relief interventions, such as increased funding for and expansion of housing choice vouchers. There was a program called ERA, Emergency Rental Assistance, and an eviction moratoria at federal, state, and local levels, which is, you know, if you are behind on the rent and you have not had a job in a certain amount of time, the government said, okay, your landlord cannot say to you, get out. They cannot evict you, which helped a lot of people get that extra time that they needed to get back up on their feet. Okay, so comparing each of the major contributors that we just looked at, let's look at the responses, mostly at a federal level, to each of those instances. So with the Great Depression, we had the Civilian Conservation Corps. This would eventually become something very similar to AmeriCorps, but this was the first thing ever. And it was created specifically for men, although they did have a later female component called the she camps. That was just designed to get people jobs, get them housing, help families, and help communities. And it really worked. It did amazing things, not just for the people who participated in the program, but for their communities. So these are the men who built initially a lot of the national parks and national forests. They would clean up after natural disasters. It got them really involved in their communities, and it was really a transformative program following the Great Depression. Around the same time as deinstitutionalization, we have the creation of Peace Corps and VISTA. So Peace Corps sends volunteers out into the world to enrich and educate communities abroad. And then VISTA, the full title is Volunteers in Service to America. It is a program that is still functioning today. I think one of their most well-known volunteers would be George R.R. Martin, the author of Game of Thrones. But VISTA was created for domestic volunteer programs. So they focused on literacy, they would do outreach in communities. The benefit of participating in these programs would be you did receive a paycheck, you got health insurance, you received vocational training, and there were no barriers to acceptance to the program. So you could use it as a tool to overcome, barriers to moving upward mobility. You could use it as a way to get out of homelessness because it is a steady job and there are resources available to help. In 1993, AmeriCorps was created, and this was kind of the formalization of an actual federal agency for national service and volunteerism. So today, AmeriCorps is kind of an umbrella corporation that not corporation, but agency, that encompasses Peace Corps, VISTA, Civilian Conservation Corps has been renamed NCCC. They also have a senior volunteer program and a bunch of other little ones like Teach for America that address literacy, homelessness. They do advocacy work a lot. Around this time also is something called the McKinney-Vento Act, which is targeted at preventing children from experiencing homelessness. So that provides for anyone, I think, under the age of 18. It provides them with the option and opportunity for housing, education, consistent food, which is why you very rarely see homeless children out on the street. We have federal processes for protecting them and making sure that they are cared for. And then with COVID and coronavirus, a lot of the assistance that happened for people experiencing housing insecurity was things like the CARES Act, where citizens received money that they could use to cover rent, things like that. The American Rescue Plan Act. And then we talked about it a little bit before, the emergency rental assistance programs. And some of those did expand beyond the actual COVID pandemic. But we'll talk about their effectiveness and ways to improve them later. So some of the things to consider with just these 4 responses is to examine how did the actions taken address the issues that were happening? How did those actions build and change over time? And how can they be invested in further from an ongoing rather than temporary basis to help address kind of homelessness? So I think here we will pause and do the chat and you can unmute yourselves or raise your hands, and we'll pause for like questions or if anyone wants to go over something again.
Thank you, Alexandra. We did receive a couple of questions in the chat, but yes, we encourage everyone to keep putting your questions or use the raise your hand feature. The first question is there a gender difference between homeless populations? Are there more homeless men or women? And if there is a difference on the specific reasons for this?
So it is more common for men to be homeless than women. It sort of depends on why they are becoming homeless. You know, women are much more likely to be taken in by family members. Women are more frequently in charge of taking care of children. So if the children are also in need of housing and the mother is with them, she will receive additional assistance to help take care of them. The bigger differences that we see between who experiences homelessness, it's more likely to happen among minority populations than it is amongst other populations. And it is also more likely to happen in like urban centers. So big cities, Los Angeles, Seattle, New York, those are the big ones that have the highest rates of homelessness.
Thank you, Alexandra. The next question is, are there any regulations about homeless people keeping their pets?
Not really. Do you mean like you're not
That was
allowed
my
to
question.
have...
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I want, yeah. So, you know, is there like, can the government take away dogs from them? Or because I see homeless people with pets, and you know, it's just sometimes obviously you feel sorry for the
Mhm.
humans and the animals too, but like if you can't feed yourself, should you have, you know, it's more of like an ethical question, I guess, but are there any regulations for that?
There are no regulations for that.
Okay.
A lot of the time it's a personal pet or a family pet if you've lost your housing situation and you don't want to give up your pet. There's a famous actor, Sylvester Stallone, from the Rocky movies. He, right before he became famous and was cast as Rocky, he had a dog and he was homeless. And he had to give the dog up to a shelter because he couldn't afford to feed the dog. And I think it's a very popular story in the news that one of the first things he did with his paycheck from the Rocky franchise was get his dog back. But, you know, aside from if it's like a very violent dog and it's attacking people, then the city or local government may step in to like take the dog away. But if it's just a man with a dog or a woman with a dog, there's no real regulation. You never really see cats. I think cats are pretty quick to just bail.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get next somewhere else.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. And the next question, can you compare the rate of homelessness in the US with other wealthy nations?
Yes. So touching back a little bit on one of the earlier slides where it's difficult to get firm numbers on homelessness globally because not all countries define it the same way. And there's different types of homelessness. So I think if you're comparing like even just Boston to Miami, as we saw earlier, if you're comparing unsheltered people living in tent cities, there's not a lot of tent cities, if any, in Miami, but there are established ones in Seattle, Los Angeles, Boston, things like that. It's also worth noting that homelessness tends to be higher than the national average in larger cities. So the average of homeless people in Washington, D.C. is higher than the US average. And then as far as comparing country to country, I mean, there is a website I can put in the chat called World Population Review, and that covers homelessness, I think, on a scale of millions citizens. Where's the chat? Here's the chat. There we go. So not all countries report the same types of homelessness, and not all countries report homelessness the same way. So it is very difficult to compare. I think the closest comparison would be like Western European countries versus the United States, or even comparing US to Canada. I don't have those exact numbers, but I would imagine, again, because European countries comparative to the United States are smaller, that the rates would be higher in the US just because we have so many people and so many more land in which things may happen.
Thank you, Alexandra. And we got another question. Over the weekend, this is actually a comment / question. So over the weekend, I had someone mention in passing that providing food and toiletries to the homeless does not help, suggesting that it does more harm than good. I know you cannot teach compassion, but what can be said to those who see providing essentials aside of the services related to workforce and housing assistance to the homeless as problematic?
That is really hard and difficult to encounter, for sure. So, I mean, a really good example would be during the pandemic. People really needed supplies, and if you need food and toilet paper, and someone is only able to give you toilet paper, that still crosses one thing off of the list. And it is, I do think, to a certain extent, compassion is a learned behavior. If you don't see people in your community standing up, following through with actions, putting in the extra work to be compassionate, you are less likely to be compassionate yourself. And that doesn't just go for homelessness, that's like across the board. If you grow up and you never see your parents picking up their shoes, the odds are low that you will start picking up your own shoes, you know? So when people say, oh, it doesn't do any good, I never actually give them any money, they're just going to spend it on drugs, which is something you hear quite a bit. You know, it's pretty easy with social media to identify when someone is just giving you like a random platitude. So having a prepared line to say to someone is not always as effective as just saying like, you know, you really think that? Let's talk about that. And let's think about how you would feel if you really needed something and someone would say, I'm not going to give you access to something that you really need because you're just going to use it in a way that I don't approve of, or in a way that contradicts how I would use it. I'm sorry that happened. It's very frustrating. All right, I think maybe
chime in
one.
there just to complicate that a little too,
Mhm.
because I think I've encountered this a lot in just socially, family, political conversations too.
Mhm.
And when it comes from a place of good intention, I think what they mean is it's more beneficial if they're getting it from an organized service, if they're going to like a kitchen or a shelter or somewhere where there's an organization behind, instead of handing someone that's panhandling food or money or whatever. So
Sure.
in that kind of dichotomy where it's less about whether or not we should be giving services, period, right? Or if it should be something that is like centralized and organized, or just, you know, I have an extra $5 in my pocket and I'm going to hand it to you as I'm walking down the street. Where do you think in that complication that comes in?
Totally. So there are things that you can do. My mom collects vouchers from the Salvation Army, and when she sees panhandlers, she will hand them a voucher and whatever cash she has available. A lot of church groups also, I know, get like their youth groups together and they will assemble little go bags of toothbrushes, toothpaste, personal wipes, stuff like that. I feel that it's always good to refer people to agencies or groups that you know are there to help them. Sometimes a lot of the shelters become very overcrowded and they're not always safe places for people to go. So if someone doesn't feel like they're able to get the help that they need, or they have had a bad experience, maybe they've been attacked, or maybe they've had their stuff stolen, they are less likely to go to a shelter or an organization. So, you know, why not both? Why not give them a couple bucks and a voucher? Or why not give them the bag of toiletries and then also give some stuff to your local food bank and make sure that there are organizations that are being sustained by the community that can help people when they're ready to seek out that help. And it can definitely be a hard talking point amongst families. Yeah. All right. Let's go back to a PowerPoint. All right, so we have talked about, not that one. We have talked about the creation of AmeriCorps. We can now talk about the benefits of a program like AmeriCorps. So I did AmeriCorps 2 times. The first time I did it, I had just graduated high school and I didn't really have a plan for what I wanted to do as far as college versus vocational training or something else. And AmeriCorps was really valuable because it gave me, you know, something productive to do, but it also came with really beneficial professional development and training. I made a lot of really good friends that I'm still in contact with today. The first program that I joined was Reading Corps. I was stationed in an elementary school and I would take the students with the lowest percentage of reading scores. So students who really had trouble reading from preschool to 8th grade. I would take them aside into a separate classroom and we would just work on phonics, reading, spelling, comprehension, whatever they needed. And I was able to, you know, help boost a lot of those students' scores, which was really rewarding to see. And that was like my first kind of experience with it. So with AmeriCorps, when you serve, you are required to do 1,700 hours of full-time volunteer work. And you're not going to get all of those hours at the location that you're stationed at. So you are, you know, required, but very much encouraged to seek out other opportunities to serve. So I ended up helping with the local Native American tribe, the Skokomish tribe, in doing roadside cleanups. We created an evacuation route for the school in the event that the local levee broke. We worked on MLK projects, feeding the homeless, establishing food banks, things like that. The second time I did AmeriCorps was with the Washington State Service Corps, which monitored and assisted all of the AmeriCorps volunteers in Washington State. So some of them were at government facilities, some of them were at religious or nonprofits, some of them were at schools, some of them were out doing, you know, national service parks restoration. And at that point, my job was, you know, consistently checking in with them. I would travel to do site visits, talk to their supervisors, make sure that the volunteers had the resources that they need. And that was really valuable because I got to see it kind of from both sides. So on the ground, how do you engage with the community? How do you meet the goals that the program has, that the school has? And then from the other side, how do you help the volunteers get to where they need to be? A lot of the times I was helping them get food or housing for themselves. Some of them were fighting to come out of poverty. I had one member who was coming out of homelessness. So that was a lot of work connecting him with organizations and people that he could, you know, get out of his situation and become more stable. It's really, really great of the program. I cannot recommend it highly enough. So AmeriCorps today encompasses, as we said earlier, Peace Corps, Vista, and CCC, and Teach for America with some other programs. Currently, AmeriCorps has over 200,000 volunteers serving across the United States, including one member at FIU. And you can scan the QR code to learn a little bit more about AmeriCorps and FIU. In Florida specifically, there are over 10,000 AmeriCorps members and seniors in service in Florida. There are 82 individual service sites in Miami-Dade County, and then there are about 60 additional sites like in the immediate surrounding areas, so like Homestead, Davie, Broward County, things like that. So some of the two more notable positions that I found for this discussion was the AmeriCorps member serving with the Homeless Leadership Academy in Palm Bay, Florida. So that service member is there to do direct outreach to people experiencing homelessness, helping them get access to healthcare and housing, giving them support, connecting them with resources, supporting the facility as well with whatever they need. And then on a slightly more national scale, there is the National Coalition for the Homeless. They have service members from AmeriCorps throughout the United States, but they do have one in Tampa, and they are more targeted for advocacy. So they will reach out to other government or non-government organizations, talk about, veterans outreach, at-risk youth outreach, get people aware of issues and work on building better connections and getting like funding, people to volunteer, resources, all those good things. So the benefit in the creation of AmeriCorps is, individuals are helped by getting jobs, health insurance, resources that they need. They get excellent professional development training. Communities are helped. Organizations write grants to receive funding to pay an AmeriCorps service member. So the organization gets funding and assistance. The community around the organization gets assistance and help, or our organizations are made more aware of not just homelessness, because it's whatever the organization sponsoring the volunteer is focused on, but it is really beneficial, and I cannot praise it enough. So a look at some of the challenges with homelessness. So a lot of scholars, healthcare workers, and homeless advocates agree that two major contributing factors are poverty and a lack of affordable housing, which are both, rather intractable societal challenges. But they have added that hard to treat psychiatric issues and substance abuse disorders are often underlying issues for chronic homelessness. So that touches on something we were talking about before. If you are struggling with a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction and you're unable to keep a consistent job, you are then subsequently unable to keep consistent housing, and you would be episodically or chronically homeless. Not necessarily always on the street. You could be someone who is frequently couch surfing or crashing with family multiple times a month or a year, but that is a condition of homelessness. It's also very important to talk about misconceptions regarding homelessness. The image and idea of a homeless person in the United States is very heavily influenced by the media, by popular culture, and by prejudices, both conscious and unconscious. Framing homelessness is not an inconsequential aspect of how we communicate. Scholars do highlight framing as significantly affecting public opinion, agenda setting, and voting behavior. So one example that is particularly cogent is many people use media coverage of selected immigrant populations as an example of how immigrants add to the homeless population, or add strain on US healthcare and welfare systems. However, I am happy to report, contrary to popular belief, there have been studies, one as early as, or as recent as March 2019, found that there is no significant difference in the rates of lifetime adult homelessness between foreign-born adults and native-born adults. So the rate of foreign-born adults who are homeless in the United States throughout their life is 1%. The rate of native-born adults who are homeless in the US throughout their lifetime is 1.7%. Foreign-born participants are less likely to have various mental and substance abuse disorders. They are less likely to receive welfare, and they are less likely to have any lifetime incarceration. And the number of years foreign-born adults lived in the United States was significantly associated with their risk for homelessness. There is something called the healthy immigrant effect that applies to mental health and social functioning of US immigrants. It doesn't always necessarily apply to homelessness, but it does play a factor. So the healthy immigrant effect is essentially, even though immigrants in the United States do largely face lower socioeconomic status and sometimes barriers to entry, like not getting chosen for jobs, things like that, they are mentally and physically healthier in contrast to their immediate counterparts who are native born in the United States. And that is largely attributed to, they stay close to people from their home country. So they have a really strong sense of community. They're holding on to their values, to their customs, which help them feel more at home where they are outside of their country. And they also tend to stick closer to their own dietary restrictions, although that does decline the longer they stay in the US. Some way or another, McDonald's is going to get you. So longstanding immigration procedures also require mental health and psychosocial evaluations that may contribute to selection effects. So not everyone who applies, for example, for an F1 visa is going to get approved. And that does mean the people who apply tend to be bright-eyed, healthier, more, centered. The bias tends to be in favor of people who present as more stable. So there are reasons to hypothesize that US immigrants are less likely to be homeless than native-born individuals because of selective migration effects, and then other factors driving the healthy immigrant effect. So all of those things are things to consider. Here, the bullet point list has been identified as the most frequently cited challenges to combating homelessness. So rising rents, that affects everyone. Pressure to act quickly by programs, which means they have less time to plan, less time to gather information and make changes because the resources are needed now. And they have a lot of pressure from their shareholders, people who donate to them, things like that. A lot of communities also experience staffing challenges. Sometimes volunteerism tends to dip. The rates of volunteerism are higher in women and families with young children. Although the differences are not staggering. So it is fairly consistent in rates of people who volunteer. We mentioned before, congregate shelters pose risks for residents. So some shelters are fine. They don't have a huge number of incidents or challenges with their residents' safety or belongings. Some shelters are very turbulent and it's not known as a safe place, and they're considered places you should only go if you really actually need help. And even in times like that, homeless people are more likely to just go straight to a hospital rather than going to a shelter. We touched on social exclusion, criminalization of people experiencing homelessness, and then crisis media from political parties. So I'm sure we are all familiar with that. All right. So now I would like to take a minute to compare existing challenges and the two largest agencies / programs at the federal level currently addressing these issues. So I talked a little bit about what serving in AmeriCorps looks like. And now I want to talk about a little bit what ARP actually looked like. ARP was designed as direct assistance to counties, state and local government with federal funds to help bolster homeless programs and programs helping people about to experience homelessness. The CARES Act was direct financial assistance to citizens. So people got a check based off of their previous year's tax filings. Families with children did get a little bit more money. Individuals got less. I think CARES Act happened 2 or 3 times during coronavirus pandemic. And then the ERA, emergency rental assistance, was low income tenants. So if you were below a certain financial threshold and you were experiencing housing instability or you were about to lose your housing, you could apply for emergency funds to pay off any, back rent that you owed, things like that, to keep you stable while you continued to look for something else. They also provided resources for people in that program to make sure, okay, you have the money now, let's get you some resources to help you get back up on your feet. So, yep.
Sorry, Alexandra. So I know it's already 12:30 and this is all amazing and we truly appreciate this conversation that has been so engaging with our students. I know you do have a slide also on resources available on the local level. So I just wanted to see if you can touch on that. Some students may have to go to their class.
Totally fine, no problem. So these are all local to Miami. They are federal, private, and non-government, nonprofit organizations. The QR codes will take you directly to the page to get involved with them. Even if it's something as simple as just donating to a food bank or getting vouchers from one of the houses or one of the trusts to hand out to people that you see, anything you do can help. And the first thing to remember is that they are just people. So treating them just with empathy and kindness, you can be firm on your boundaries. If you're not able to help, you can say that you're not able to help, but you can say it kindly, and that's the biggest thing.
Thank you, Alexandra. I truly appreciate also sharing the resources. On the personal level, I had supported some of these organizations, and we got a question in the chat that on how you can contribute them in Miami level, and also how you can provide skills to homelessness. So I would highly recommend the Chapman Partnership for Homeless. This organization provides resources to get them back into their social settings also and into the workforce. So definitely we will go ahead and share that also in our YouTube video so everyone can get access to it. Just wanted to provide a reminder to everyone that next week we are going to have our last TTR session for the semester. This time around, it's going to be with the organization Results on Global Fund for to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. So please join us next week. And thank you very much, Alexandra, for such an engaging session and also for sharing your knowledge on this topic.
Of course, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.